So first of all, here are some of the materials that I needed for this project. This is Sculpey, and it's a type of clay that you can mold very easily. You'll see how easy it is to mold and play around with. And you bake it in the oven for about 15 minutes at 275 degrees, and it becomes hard. It's made permanent after that, heating up. And some of the other products they make is this bacon bond, so that if you bake pieces separately, you have a way of gluing it on and baking it. And this stuff helps you smooth out things by dissolving the outside layer of clay a little bit. And then some miscellaneous tools that I picked up while I was at Michael's, which is where I got the Sculpey, became very useful to form the clay and add some details. So it's probably good practice to do something a little easy to make. So I made this little mouse before I got started, and I found it really easy to work with. The other thing you're going to need to make the silicone mold is a silicone base, and I'll show you where to get it at the end in the credits. That's the silicone base, and you need the catalyst also. And the reason why it's dyed this green is that when you mix it up, and I'll show you this later on, you can see the consistent light green color once it's made. You might also need some plasticine clay, foam board, aluminum foil, and cardboard for this project, and I'll show you how to use that later on. Also a container to mix the silicone with, and a paint stir stick is really good to mix up the silicone later on. I did some concept art before I started too, because I didn't have the exact idea for how I wanted this voodoo to look, so doing the sketches for me was really good. I also learned how to use this clay by watching Ace of Clay. He has his own YouTube channel, and it's really great to watch. It's entertaining because he makes these fantastic figures right in front of your eyes. And he always starts off by using aluminum foil and tape, sometimes wire, to make a base before he puts the clay over it. But that way the clay is not too thick, and you're not paying a fortune for thick, solid clay things that you make. And it also helps the clay to harden in the oven because it can only be a certain thickness. So this ensures that you're just really making a shell with the details around this armature of tape and aluminum foil. I don't have a pasta maker, so I couldn't just make these flat sheets like he does, but I just used a couple things that I had to roll this clay into thin sheets that I could just wrap around the aluminum foil later. You'll see me do this. It becomes easier to work with. So once I've made these sheets, I just tore some off and started to just put it on over this armature that I made with aluminum foil. Now I'm using one of my tools because it's hard to get your fingers into some of these areas, so I just use this round pencil-like tool and smooth out the neck a little bit. Otherwise, you can use your fingers for a lot of these things. I'm making just a little snake of clay, as Ace of Clay also says, to make some eyebrows. So I'm just roughing it out, adding it where I need to, and then blending it in with my fingers. It starts off kind of rough, but you can smooth out a lot of this as you go along, which is what I'm going to do on this. I ended up not even using this figure, but it was great to learn how to use this clay when I was making these designs. It ended up being too big for a piece of soap, but I learned a lot, and I got a better idea of what kind of look I wanted for my voodoo. This one just ended up looking so goofy, I just didn't really like it. I wanted something that was a little bit more of a cute voodoo, if there is such a thing. But you can see how I work with this one. I didn't film the actual one that I used, but you make the forms basically the same way I'm making this one. Now I'm just making its ears. You can make parts of your sculpture separately, bake them so they're harder, and then attach it with that glue. But I didn't feel like I really needed to do it that way on these figures. They're meant to be kind of simple, not a lot of detail. So I'm just adding little ropes of clay to make the hair, using a tool to kind of sculpt the hair in a little bit better. And I'm looking at my concept art a little too, that was helpful. This is what he ended up looking like, and it's like too weird, but now you'll see the other one that I made, and that's the one that I used actually for the Voodoo doll soap. Thought it was a little more cute. So I made a drawing for him too. I wanted something a little bit more cute. There it is, all finished, and it's ready to be cast with the silicone. And separately, but using the same technique, I started to make these eyeballs because I wanted a bunch of eyes that I could choose at random so that I could change the look of every single doll by picking different types of eyes. So it meant I had to roll out a lot of little balls and alter them some way. Some of them I just poked a little hole for the pupil. Some I put a little cross in the middle, like a little X. I made a bunch of different sizes. And this is where I use that bacon bond to add a little pupil that kind of stuck out a little bit. So you see I just put some on a toothpick and then added it to the white of the eye. And just let that sit. And then you bake it, and then it adheres really well. I made enough eyes so that I could make a whole silicone mat full of these eyes. And here I am baking the clay in the oven for 15 minutes at 275 degrees. In the meantime, I'm now going to make the mat for these eyes. You'll see what I mean by that. Once it's all flat, I'm just going to push things into it, and I'm letting them stick out, because later on I'm going to pour the silicone over this, and when it hardens, I'll have these little molds of buttons that I can pour soap into to make little button eyes. I saw a lot of Voodoos online, and I saw some of them have these button eyes. So I'm just pushing them enough into this plasticine clay. It's a different kind of clay. It never hardens. And now I'm using the plasticine clay to make a reservoir around this whole mold so that when I pour the silicone in there, it just doesn't go flowing everywhere. And then I put cardboard around that just so that the weight of the silicone wouldn't just push these walls over. Now I'm calculating how much the silicone I need to make. So basically you find out the thickness, the length, the width, measure that out, multiply those together to give you the volume. And then I multiplied by 0.4. That will give me how many ounces I need of the silicone. 17.6, but then I rounded it to 18 ounces. So 18 ounces of this silicone solution after I mix everything together. But I divided it by 11 because I needed 10 parts of the silicone base and 1 part of the catalyst. $16 ounces of the silicone and 1.6 ounces of the catalyst. I need to have it all written out like a recipe. So there's my recipe. 10 parts to 1 part. So I'm going to pour 16 ounces of that silicone and 1.6 ounces of the catalyst, and now I'm stirring it in. You can see that dark catalyst lets you know when it's all mixed in because it becomes one consistent light green. You see darker streaks of that, you know you didn't mix it well enough. So there it is. Now the way to pour this is in one location, about a foot up, in a thin stream, and this way some of the bubbles get worked out of the solution. It's a little slow process, but you're being careful about it. I didn't have any bubbles that interfered with my mold, so this was a good way of doing it. Can you see the bubbles in there too? But I kind of rocked it back and forth a little bit, pounded it down, just like you would with soap. And I think I got a majority of the bubbles to at least go to the back surface of my mold. So there it is. After I pulled it away, you can see my buttons and those eye depressions, and that's what I will later. There's my original eyes. Now this is that little guy that I made earlier, and I made that in the same way in the silicone. Now I'm filling it with soap. And I found if I used different colors and poured them kind of strategically, that it did show up in the final form, the little Voodoo. You'll see that in a minute. And it took about a little over an hour to set up. So here I'm just popping him out of the mold. And there he is. So you can see that color come through. That way each one is different. I made a bunch of these. As soon as they were done, I wrapped them in plastic wrap so that they wouldn't sweat, become sticky. And now this is the next day. I'm unwrapping them to get ready to paint them with my soap paints that I made up. I made my skulls last year, my Day of the Dead skulls, in the same way, and that paint really held up really well. So I have a basic idea of how I'm going to really quickly paint these. Otherwise it's going to add on to how time consuming these things are. Just want to bring out its features a little bit, and you get a lot of leeway because if you look up voodoo dolls online, they're really kind of abstractedly designed. Anyway, there's my green paint now. I did all the purple painting first, now I'm adding the green. If you can see, I have like a mug coffee heater that I keep these on so that it remains fluid. It needs to be hot. They kind of look cute, all waiting to be painted. I also made the heart on my original mold, so that was easy to make these, paint them, because it was just standing out. There's what they look like before I add the eyes. I forgot to tape the making of the eyes. I mean, the making of the eyes, what I mean is inserting the eyes, but I just used some melt and pour and stuck them in. Just gives you an idea of how different the eyes are on all of them. Gives them a little different character. And there's the button one that I made. That's melt and pour soap too. Here, there. If you get embarrassed, look the other way. These are all naked right now, but they're waiting for their clothes. This is what a mess I had in my soap room when everything was going. This is how I eventually packed them. That's crinkle paper and plastic boxes. I also shrink wrapped these so that they wouldn't sweat in their clothes. They kept looking at me. So this is, I just cut up basically little squares of fabric, and I got this fabric in the remnant section, so it was really inexpensive. Folded that in half and cut a little V shape for the collar, and another little cut right there. little curve for its waist. And just cut the bottom and a little V on the bottom. I'm looking at my sketch of what the clothes should look like, placing it over the Voodoo doll, and I bought some colored twine to tie the fabric to the dolls. And for my project, I needed about 2 feet of cord, and it was like perfect. So probably one of the most difficult parts of this project was holding the fabric in place while I tied the knots for this, but I got used to it. I think you will develop your own system if you do a couple of these. It just felt good to have a little project to work on. I wasn't rushed really at this point in time. Though I am working on another project that I will edit one of these days. I was actually working on that other project as these Voodoo dolls set in their mold, so I wouldn't just be staring at it waiting for it to harden. So basically I tied its waist and then I did a diagonal across the front. If you do something like this, it's good to leave a little extra twine so that you have the other end to tie something to. As I think of it, I could have made a slip knot to put around its waist first. That might have helped. This actually was the fun part after all the pouring and unmolding. It's like the decoration part, it's always more fun. I don't show it here, but I labeled what goes into the glycerin soap on the back of these. There he is. A little out of focus, but there's a bunch of them. They're just waiting for me to pack them in their boxes. And that's it. They ended up being very colorful. People liked them right away when I shared them, and I've already sold quite a bit. They work out to be about 3 ounces of soap. And there they are in their boxes, ready to go to a new home. And the Day of Dead Skulls. So thanks for watching. I hope you found that kind of entertaining. I don't know whether you want to go through all that trouble, but I found it a lot of fun. And at least I got to show you the process of making silicone molds. And I've got other projects coming up too, so I hope you'll stay tuned for that. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for all the comments. And look at the website too. I've got the skulls and I've got the Voodoo dolls up on the website. Alright, take care everybody. Bye.